This is Coda Radio, episode 203 for May 2nd, 2016. Everyone, and welcome to Coda Radio, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly talk show taking a pragmatic look at the art and business of software development and related technologies. This episode is brought to you by our two fine sponsors, DigitalOcean and Linux Academy. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is the recently successfully forked Mr. Michael Dominic. Hello there, Michael.
Hello, Mr. Fisher.
Hello, Proud Papa. How is everyone doing over there?
Everyone is good. Currently, we are in the middle of a nap time.
I noticed you got that hushed tone a little bit.
It's that hiding in the basement sort of.
Yeah. Don't make a noise. We got a couple hours here to sleep before it's going to be feeding time, and then everything's chaos again.
Oh my God.
So have you gotten like a few late nights? I know that was my big thing is because I was already sort of a late night owl as it was, when it came time to stay up late with Dylan or something, put him in the sling, go work for a while, and stay up to like 1, 2 in the morning working. Have you been doing a few of those?
Yeah, me and Dracula are on the same schedule, it seems like.
Yikes. Yeah, so we have, though, I guess, in some ways, benefited from your late night expeditions because the show doc is packed. It's packed full of stuff today. We have a ton of stuff in the show notes to cover. Everything from a top of the show feedback all the way down to looking at the future of software running everywhere and anywhere, and maybe some Linux switching follow-up towards the end. Maybe if we have enough time. I don't want to overdo it this week, but there is a little follow-up if we have time for it.
I think we'll make it.
There's a lot. There is a lot to cover. So do you want to start with this programming rant that was sent into the show by Orbital Seafair? Or Cipher?
Yeah, I'm just going to, real quick, a little discussion about OO versus functional. And it's a great post to our subreddit, though if you look at the comments, didn't necessarily agree with him. But the thing I think he's reacting to, and I'm not going to restate his whole argument, I would encourage you to go to the subreddit to read it, is there is a difference between, or this is the argument I hope he really was making, that functional programming has itself become a buzzword, and therefore is being sold, in a way that's not really appropriate. Now, he does have a point about all of it just being syntactical sugar over imperative programming, which is not really correct. But there's a really good conversation in there about it. I definitely agree with the perhaps broader but somewhat vaguer point about, functional programming is a tool that solves a certain set of problems probably better than OO. But that doesn't mean everything needs to be functional tomorrow, right? And it doesn't mean that everything should be functional. A great place where this is going on is actually in the .NET space. You have F#, which is Microsoft's super functional, I'm a data scientist language, right? But they also have C#, which is adopting some functional features, but is still very much an object-oriented language. Mm-hmm. So...
it strikes me something you said there, and it's actually, I think, was probably a point of the discussion. The way something sort of becomes marketed and then it becomes like a brand almost, and I'm using brand really super roughly here, but it happened a lot in my areas of IT as well. Is that there's a thing or a concept that sort of becomes general knowledge, and by the time it reaches general knowledge, it has almost no meaning at all. Another good example of this would be like the meaning of 4G on your cell phone. LTE spec really was going to be, they came up with LTE as a continuing generation, evolving technology because they couldn't actually get to the original speeds that 4G was supposed to be. So 4G, by the time it actually made it to consumers, had a completely different meaning. It was just branding for get you a new phone. And there's concepts that are core technologies or core functions that have very specific meanings that by the time enough people seem to know about it, it almost can be used as a way to lure the less critical thinkers into just, that's a great idea because it's got, and then insert buzzword here, or it has, or it is, and then, it is based on, or something like that, and then boom. Okay, sure. Oh, yeah, sure. And then...
and I would also add to that, one of the dangers, particularly when we're talking about functional programming, seems to be that, of course, the textbook definition, there are functional languages and there are OO language. But in practice, for what I would say 99.99% of the developers listening to this are doing, it's a spectrum, right? So, for instance, even freaking Java is now adopting some functional stuff, very little, right? But Scala has a lot more functional stuff, but it's still technically an OO language. So, and when I say technically, I mean it is absolutely an OO language.
I have a couple of points of order that I wanted to bounce off you from his feedback, just briefly, because a couple of like closing paragraphs, which I thought were kind of thought provoking. He says modular design is actually a result of using great frameworks, and less about the language. With exception of everything written in Java and PHP is terrible. Great frameworks help you build code with an expandable structure. So what do you think about modular program design being actually a result of just choosing a great framework? And then that great framework is helping you build code that's expandable or scalable?
I'm not sure that it's necessarily the framework itself, right? Obviously, picking a good framework will help. For instance, Ruby on Rails, the problem it originally solved was having more organized web applications, right, using the MVC model. But that doesn't mean that there's not a bunch of Rails spaghetti code out there too.
I think it's another way of saying. I think it is another way of saying right tool for the right job.
Well, it's right tool for the right job, but there's actually a much broader point.
You can also torpedo yourself early on by picking the wrong framework.
Well, it doesn't matter what framework you pick, right? Or whether you're trying to be OO or functional, if you don't actually invest the time in software architecture, systems design, things like that. Mm-hmm. Now, that's something that I particularly have struggled with. When you're working with a lot of startups, cowboy coding tends to be the day because no one wants to pay for documentation. It is something that, I've literally more and more, I'm starting to get to the point where if you don't develop some sort of software architecture documents, you're probably going to waste a lot of time reworking and refactoring that you don't need to.
Boy, isn't that a good reality check?
Yeah, and that's independent of what framework you choose. Now, if you choose something crappy, or if you try to apply, OO patterns to a job that's more functional, or vice versa, functional patterns to a more OO job, obviously you have problems, right? I mean, it's the right tool for the right job, but there's a point, and I think on this show particularly we don't cover it enough, about doing your damn homework. And it's really not a good idea to, go command space Xcode file new or Android Studio new, right? Whatever your IDE of choice is, and just start coding. Rant over.
Emacs. On the line of reality checks and things like that, so there is something that I sometimes try to underplay just because I don't want to be offensive, but I sometimes I listen and I read some of the feedback and we talk about things, and I can't help but come at it from a very practical sysadmin style perspective, and I look at some of this stuff and I go, well, this is obviously programmer self-delusion. And I don't mean to be so harsh, but there is a little bit of that. I feel like sometimes I come at this as an outsider with an outsider's perspective, and I can say, you guys are being a little ridiculous here. Here's what I mean. He says, I personally believe the reason for this recent chatter is languages like Go, Rust, and Swift is because they are looking to establish themselves, and the best way to do that is demonize their current big players. I'm going to stop right there. It almost implies that like there's this grand conspiracy at play to promote the agenda or propaganda of Swift, Rust, or Go. Like they have a dark organization behind them that is out pushing agendas forward on the net about their advantages and demonizing the other languages. And this line of thinking, it seems very boxed into me. It feels very like well, my idea, my solution is so right that there must be a concentrated effort to intentionally demonize what I like because it's so obviously it's great. And that to me feels like the beginning of self-rationalization about your choices and the beginning of shutting down your perspectives of maybe finding newer and better technologies.
I'm actually going to defend the original poster here a little bit. I think you're right to a point that his argument about hating, part of his argument is factually wrong, that it's all syntactical sugar, but let's just ignore that because, maybe that's not what he meant in the heat of the moment. He said the wrong thing. There is, frankly, it's annoying, right, to have some quantifiable experience. Let's look at my Swift hate, right? It's because I have a decade of Objective-C experience, right? And it kind of diminishes any competitive advantage I would have. And maybe I'm projecting onto this fellow, but my feeling from reading his post, and tell me if you agree, is that he feels like his skills or his knowledge is somewhat being degraded, right?
Yeah, and I think he's also right to a degree, because he says, just to ensure that this post sounds adequately trendy, I'm going to throw in some buzzwords. Scrum, Agile, OOP, functional, and of course viral. Like, he's right to some degree too. Like, I'm not trying to completely underplay what he's saying. There is a certain hype factor to Rust and Swift and Go, but definitely Rust and Swift. But I don't know if it's necessarily unjustified either.
So, right, I'm going to put him on the couch and I'll put myself with him. We have to suck it up, right? Like really, we may think that, our former interns are simply wrong, right? But it doesn't matter. You can't fight the tide. So, of course, using functional programming, using these new technologies for no reason is not optimal and is frankly stupid. But the reality is that part of technology is marketing. And, sitting there and digging in your heels like a little mule and saying, I'm never going to do Swift. I'm never going to look at functional concepts. I'm never going to do this or that or Agile or whatever, whatever your pet peeve of the day is probably not the best choice.
Yeah, boy, you are really right about the really hard. I feel like when you say it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong, like for example, our poster here, Orbital Sapphire or Saphir, whatever, could be 100% right. It just almost doesn't even matter, though, because the force of the market moves forward regardless if that's the direction it's going. And I feel like that's a lesson you've learned the hard way in some cases.
Well, I mean, you can look at feedback on recent shows, right? I mean, the reality is you can't, if you are going to be a developer, particularly like a consultant developer, where you have to go sell yourself, you can certainly question the new trendiness, right? And you can be a voice urging caution. But at some point, you have to fold. Let's make it real, right? If Apple does not say, and we're dropping Swift on June 13th, which is my birthday, by the way, which would be a great present. That's their WWDC day.
Yeah, that's what's good. Yeah. Happy birthday, Mr. Dominic.
Right. I would literally have no choice but to fold and say, okay, well, from today on, anything new is all Swift. Because, we look at this where, I like Objective-C. You may like some older technologies too, just based on our age. But remember the old VB guys, right? I remember taking a crap on PHP people too. This is a cycle. And once you hit a certain age or certain years of experience, it's every 5 years, right? Your stuff becomes old. And that's the way it is.
Yeah. I'm going to take a moment and mention Linux Academy. linuxacademy.com/coders. This is a great place to go to keep your skills fresh. And what you can really rely about with Linux Academy is the people behind it are passionate about this technology, so they're following this whole area. It's Linux Academy, and it's everything about Linux, all of the basics, all the advanced concepts, and then all of the technologies built on top of it. Development on top of the Linux platform, as you know, is getting, you might say, slightly popular. You might say there's a few people that are deploying cloud servers that run Linux, and you might say it is a good skill set to have. These are all things you could possibly say. Well, guess what? linuxacademy.com/coders. That's the place to go. You got to go to coders/coders to give this show here credit, keep us on the air. They have 2,379. Might as well just call it 2,380. Might as well just call it, because it's going to be that soon. They're rolling out content all the time. They've increased their staff to make their old content fresh and relevant and keep it updated, which is a major investment. They have 7+ distributions you get to choose from. Scenario-based labs that put you in the middle of everyday common tasks, which is very nice for confidence building. And they spin up the virtual servers as you need them, and they match the courseware that you chose. So if you chose for your courseware Debian, or you chose Ubuntu or CentOS, they'll spin up the virtual server to match that, so your environment stays consistent. They have graded server exercises, which are genius. They give you nice lab environments, so you SSH into this sucker, and then you begin a specific courseware. They'll grade you as you go, give you feedback, give you notes, detailed study guides to download. You can keep yourself. Live events that really help you because you can interact with the instructor and ask them questions. And of course, instructor mentoring is available when you need it. which is outrageously a big deal for this kind of courseware. Been thinking about getting into Python development or Ruby? Maybe just to spite Mike, you want to try out a little PHP. They've got courseware on all of it. And Android development, especially a great way to learn any of the Amazon Web Services stuff. And a nice way to do it where you're not going to be surprised by a bill or something like that. Just comes as part of the courseware. Check them out, linuxacademy.com/coders. A bunch of great technology. They have an availability planner if you don't have a lot of spare time, or you just have a kind of a complicated schedule. Trust me, I know what that's like. They can accommodate that. In-depth resources that become yours, a library of information, a community stacked full of Jupiter Broadcasting community members. Go to linuxacademy.com/coders. And a big thank you to Linux Academy for sponsoring the Coder Radio program. So, Mr. Dominic, we are living in the future. I officially am starting to feel like it's the future. Like when I have cars that I can just call up on demand, it's beginning. It is nigh. Uber feels like something of a harbinger. I say it's time to invest. Everybody spend money. This thing's going all the way up. Nothing could go wrong. Right, Mr. Dominic?
I just want to say, called it, bitches.
Wait a second here. Hold on a second.
Get out of here.
And I might as well give you a little...
Inappropriate?
There you go.
I can't hear the soundboard at all.
Oh, really? How about now?
Inappropriate?
There.
Nope.
Turn it up. Well, basically, it's an inappropriate.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't. No,
All
it
right,
doesn't. It
so-
literally does not matter.
So my rule of thumb for tech is once it's in the Wall Street Journal,
Yeah.
it's now history.
Oh,
Meaning
because it's so
already happened.
obvious that the Wall Street Journal's covering it. Is it?
The Wall Street Journal picked it up. It's like, somebody reporting that someone died right after the funeral. It's like, no shit, Sherlock.
Yeah.
The tech bubble is bursting, and I don't want to talk about this for too long, but I've been calling this for a while. Some on-hands experience dealing with potential clients who are looking for funding in the New York area.
Did you hear that?
I did hear that.
Yeah, there we go. I fixed it.
There was there's just not a lot of capital to be had.
So you're seeing like a drying up of funds?
Well, I'm seeing where tech investing is becoming like everything else. Great, go pop open your 401k or your savings, make a proof of concept, get some customers, get some revenue, and then come back with some metrics. Rather than you being able to go in, in 2009, you could go in with a PowerPoint, a pack of Juicy Fruit, and get $1 million valuation. Now we're in a different world, which is probably a function of the market maturing, particularly for mobile apps, but also, Uber, it cannot possibly be worth $6.25 billion.
Yeah, okay. So to that point specifically, venture capitalist Bill, I'm going to say Gurley, I don't know, of Benchmark, that's one of the firms, described this phenomenon at length. And here's a tricky thing that they're doing. And it's funny, if you've watched the TV show Silicon Valley, this is in there. It's dirty term sheets. They allow some companies to continue raising money at higher valuations by promising bigger payoffs to new investors. So each time they get a round of investing, now all of a sudden they're valuated at this new amount that the investors were willing to go in. And then they can go to the next round of investors who will say, look, we were valued at this, and now we've done this much work, so now we should be valued at this. And they're essentially floating that to each round of investors. At a certain point, of course, that bill comes due. And then, of course, some of these companies have major burn rates, which gets them into trouble very fast. So they have almost a catastrophic downward shift once they hit a red line. Investors who have been burned at one company will be more reluctant to support higher valuations elsewhere. As word spreads through the venture community, other investors will return, and then they become cautious as well. They say venture investing is like any other market, torn between greed and fear.
Yeah.
The fear cycle is where we are living right now. And the Wall Street Journal shows like Dropbox, for example, Cloudera, Uber, and they're all showing the different trends that are in place. So do you think this really has any impact on somebody like you who's in a sort of...
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay, really? Okay.
Oh, this is a huge impact on me.
Even though you wouldn't say, even so you're not necessarily going out to get VC funding, because now that means your customers will be getting funding? Is that what it is?
This is so when your customer base is suffering, it's not great for you.
Okay, yeah.
Though I'm so happy that I pivoted to larger, more business-oriented customers.
So do you think, really,
Yeah,
so when I hear this, I think, though, it also, in some ways, though, doesn't it sort of fundamentally prove that your method of bootstrap it myself and make a lifestyle business that I can get as big as possible without having to go to funding, Doesn't that sort of say that long term you're making the right bet, even if it means your customers are going to be suffering short term?
So, and I do want to get off this quickly because we have a ton to cover, but I just finished the book called Disrupted by Dan, I think it's Lyons is how you say it.
Yep. Which
it covers this exact thing. Everybody should read it. It's on Kindle. It's like $11. The main point he makes, other than laughing at crazy valley culture, is that the game you and I are in, which is, making a profit every month or every quarter so we can pay our bills, feed our kids, things like that, is not the same game that VC-funded startups are in. They're in the game of inflating valuations beyond what they're actually getting in revenue to have, an exit, right, to IPO or to get new funding. Or, one thing that you often don't hear about too much is that usually in later stages of funding or even in a Series A, the founders will actually get a little bit of a payout.
Right.
So they don't really need the company to be sustainable at that point. That's not always true, and I don't mean to denigrate all founders. It's just something that does happen. For instance, your business is by definition profitable, right? Unless you have some giant line of credit that that I don't know about.
No. Although some days I think about it because we have a building work that we need to do, which is
Right.
starts at $10,000.
Right. But let's say your profit a year is like $100,000. VCs would rather you have $1 billion or $1 million loss than $100 profit because what's the Russ Hanneman quote from Silicon Valley? Oh, no numbers. That's measurable.
Right.
It'll never be enough.
Yeah, and it's also for them too. They're playing at a bigger level where they're buying up a potential future market, and so they're willing to invest in several companies in a certain area. And to them, it's one of many things that they have in the pot.
It's a very distorted market, right? It's not about what these companies are really worth as businesses in the traditional sense. It's what are their shares worth that another investor will theoretically pay later. Yeah.
I guess we could also. It's a topic to simmer on because it's going to be going in this direction more. Maybe we can talk about it in the future if we have.
Yeah.
But I know you have been spending a few late nights thinking about bots. Bum, bum, bum. And it's funny. I've been thinking about bots lately too. And even though I know we just recently talked a little about it on the show, it's sort of taken on a new life with you. What's going on over there?
Yeah, so I mentioned it on the show a couple weeks ago. I've been playing around with the Microsoft bot framework. I have a little bit of I don't want to call it a full review, but let's call it a micro review or first impressions.
I love it.
A couple things I overlooked the first time we talked about it. So you can write your bot in C# or Node.js, i.e. JavaScript, which is interesting. It is actually possible, and I have done it, to develop your bot on Mac or Linux via the command line using any editor you want, right? So the difference there is you don't have the tooling. So Microsoft has a nice GUI interface built into Visual Studio that lets you do your debugging. But, then you're using Visual Studio. Another interesting thing is if you go to that GitHub page, I had a very brief conversation with some of the developers on it and some people having some trouble in the quote bot community. You can actually use Mono instead of .NET proper for the C# side of it, which I thought was really interesting.
Okay. So, what would be the advantage of that? Is it because that's more of it? Is that because that's what's available to the Mac platform and the Linux platform? Why would you do that?
The Microsoft bot framework actually requires you to be running a web service somewhere. And if you scroll down there, you'll actually see that it is totally possible to run a Linux web server with Mono running on it as your Microsoft bot server.
Huh.
So think about a DO droplet or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's nice. And that seems much more approachable to how people deploy software in the cloud.
Well, and it seems much more realistic, right?
Right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, right now my current setup is I'm actually using Visual Studio Code to develop a prototype bot in C# on my Mac. Just trying to get my feet wet. Not sure I'm going to stick with Microsoft's bot framework.
So when you say you're developing a bot, is this something you intend to actually interact directly with another human being as the user interface, or is it something that's going to take place on the back end and take care of things? Like what kind of bot are you talking about?
So I talked about it some on the last show we were live on. basically a front level support bot is what I'm trying to do.
Okay. All right. Wow,
Yeah.
man, that is pretty ambitious. I gotta say. I was
Yeah,
reading.
it's a
It seems like there's a lot of
yeah.
bots that are in production today that we don't even realize are really bots, but it's because they pretty much work on the back end taking care of stuff. And that almost seems like a slam dunk because you can have a bunch of great functionality with something that just takes very simple commands, maybe from an operator. When it's something that has to interact with human beings, there's a lot to parse there.
Well, one thing I will give the Microsoft framework is they have a lot of built-in plugins that make that a little easier. If you cared about Skype, it would be even better. Unfortunately, I don't.
So the advantage from Microsoft is, here, we're going to give you these bots. We're going to give you some of the stuff to work on these bots.
Well, they give you these plugins, right? So think of it as interaction layers, right? They give you
and
one
the
for
advantage
Slack,
to
for
them
email.
is what? Maybe you'll integrate with Skype? Is that their...
Well, the advantage to them is it makes it easier,
Yeah.
right? So if you already have these pre-packaged libraries you can use, you'll save time. The concerns so far that I'm having with it, it absolutely positively works on Mac and Linux. Visual Studio is still the first-class citizen here.
So Windows.
Right, which is just, if we get to it, we'll talk about it more, is just not my ideal dev environment. I worry about lagging support, right? I also worry about the mono project. What is going to happen to the mono project? Because that's a pretty severe dependency to have. Mm-hmm. We've talked about it, I think, in episode it was 17. We talked about dependencies. With the .NET Core now being open source officially from Microsoft, I'm not sure that I would want to base anything on mono.
If
long term, right now it works, but
if they were to say phase it out, don't you imagine there would be somewhat of an obvious transition to whatever?
Yeah, my hope is that at some point it'll be a swap replacement, right?
Yeah.
Where you just remove the mono dependency and you put in the .NET Core dependency.
It seems like the open source community could even take care of that.
Yeah, I mean, to Microsoft's credit, they've been fairly good at working with the community right there on GitHub. So,
okay, I want to ask you. I know not to over stretch this point, but the chat room is asking if Cortana or Siri were introduced today at, let's say, WWDC in June or whatever, Google I/O. They announced Google Now today. Would we not just call that a bot? Would we call that? I think we would call that a bot, wouldn't we? In today's parlance.
Would. It's funny because I'm not sure how you define bot correctly. There was this article I just read about, apps versus bots. I don't think bot is its own standalone thing. I think a bot is a support module to either, physical, i.e. human services, or, other technological services, right? Cortana, in my opinion, is definitely a bot. I mean, how could she not be? I've used Siri plenty. I use Google Now all the time. They seem very bot-like, although Google Now has kind of fallen off for whatever reason. The one that doesn't really fit the pattern for me yet is I'm taking a brief look at the Facebook Messenger platform, their quote-unquote bot framework. That seems much less... on the other hand, it's much less ambitious than the Microsoft or some of the other efforts we're going to talk about in a few
Less
minutes.
ambitious? How so?
Well, the Microsoft and the other framework I'm looking at, It's a Bot, which is a open source bot framework written in Golang, which I've also done a prototype in, and it's really nice. To be honest, I didn't think I'd like Golang as much as I do, but we'll talk about that on the next topic. They're just bots in the cloud, quote unquote, that can have interfaces anywhere. They can have interfaces on email, voice, Slack, which is of particular interest to me. And really anything you could write an integration to, right? For my purposes, Hockey app, any of these kind of customer-facing portals, where the Facebook Messenger, the technology is very impressive. It's, I forgot the name of the company that they acqui-hired, but it's wit.ai, natural language processing. It's got a lot of really cool advanced features, but it's so tied to the Facebook platform that I'm not sure that doesn't limit it in a pretty significant way, especially when you're thinking about, enterprise use, right?
I could see Facebook getting a lot of traction with Messenger and stuff built right into your Facebook feed over time. I could actually see that even being simpler. I could still see getting a lot of attention. It was just, is that the right user base? That'd be maybe the question, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see myself, asking the Facebook bot to help me schedule a party, right? Or a pub trivia night. I just can't see me having my customers interact with it.
Yeah. Ooh, that would be really good to, especially a bot for setting up like a party meeting or something like that. That could be really cool. So can I tell you just briefly how we're using bots?
Go ahead.
And then we'll move forward. It's for us, bots have been a part of Jupiter Broadcasting for years and years and years because we came at it as an IRC tool that we've been playing with different iterations of them for a long time. And then, at some point several years ago, Jbot was created, an open source project that does things like title suggestions or quotes from hosts or calendar, tells you when the calendar is. You can get Mumble information on the Mumble server. There's a lot of queries that you can query in our chat room as a chat question, and Jbot will answer you, including just silly stuff like a Magic 8-Ball kind of a thing where you can ask it questions. And over time, we started adding more functionality, like bang suggest to title suggestion, which nobody in the damn chat room is doing right now, guys. We need titles. And then and that integrated into a voting page where you would bang suggest, and then Jbot would grab that title and add it to a voting page, and people could go vote. And then we decide, well, it would be nice if we could officially start and stop the shows for these voting. So then we added the capability of Jbot to officially start and stop shows for voting, and then we added additional streaming capabilities recently, and we're still working on the final code for this, but we added 2 new DigitalOcean droplets, Satcom 1 and Satcom 2, that stream out to a bunch of different endpoints now. So now we're live on YouTube, for example, and other ones. And we are working on Jbot so that when I do that start show command to start the votes, to open the voting, it will, on the back end, use the DigitalOcean API to spin up the Satcom 2 DigitalOcean droplet, which then sends it to all of the endpoints that we don't stream to 24/7. We have some destinations like jblive.tv and Ustream TV where we're live 24/7. And then we have some destinations where the audience does not expect you to be live all the time, and it's weird for you to be live when you're not actually live. So so we don't stream to those places all the time, and that's Satcom 2. And using the API on the back end, we're just using Jbot as an interface to talk to that API. And so when I start the show, it'll go start the voting, and it'll spin up the Satcom 2 DigitalOcean droplet, and boom, we go live. And then when I end the show and close voting for the day, for that episode, Satcom 2 spins down, using, again, the API. And so for us, bots have always been a part of life because they've just been a part of IRC, and IRC, as you can see, if you watch the video version of the show, is closely integrated into the production of our shows. So bots have been around for a while in that sense, and it's just now there's more and more functionalities becoming available to them in some sense. Like now we can integrate it with an API that allows us to turn an Ubuntu box on and off remotely in a data center in San Francisco. That is really cool.
It's also important to kind of note bots' place in quote tech hype history. Right, they're coming after apps, which were very visual, very designer focused. Mm-hmm. Bots are almost a sort of
anti-UI.
My opinion. Right, they're a reaction against that. Right,
yeah.
They're they're back to the command line. They're a text interface. Now that text may also now be a speech interface instead of just IRC or Slack or whatever other text tool you're using. But
I think people who own an Amazon Echo, and I do not have one, but people who own one will tell you that that sort of high level of accuracy voice interaction is a total new future UI. It is a UI on its own. How you interact with it is a UI. It's just a different kind of user interface. And there is so much hype around bots too that you don't want to get swept up in that. Like VentureBeat says the $200 billion chatbot disruption. They just posted that yesterday.
A lot of people are going to write a lot of stupid bots.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah. There's going to be a lot of bots with bad names, like that bot that Microsoft wrote. That whatever it was.
Tay.
Yeah, Tay. Yeah. I thought so.
So before we jump off of the bots,
mm-hmm.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about the It's a Bot framework. It's written in Golang. The interface is in Golang. I've spent less time with it than I have the Microsoft bot framework, but it's really a very close, very strong contender. to the point where I'm actually still evaluating it against the Microsoft framework. I'm pleasantly surprised by how appropriate Go is actually for this sort of task.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think we're going to talk more about Go in just a moment. Before we move on, because while we're still semi-bot related, I did mention them. I'll mention DigitalOcean. Go over to DigitalOcean.com and support this show by using our promo code CODERDIGITAL. That's one word, lowercase. All smashed together. Coder Digital will give you a $10 credit. You can spin up a rig yourself and try them out. Now, there are go-to Linux infrastructure on demand. They have Ubuntu 16.04 rigs ready to go right now. It's been out for just a few days, and they're right on top of that. In fact, they have great tutorials, too. So even if you're going to deploy a machine and you're not totally up to snuff on how to manage it, really good documentation. Here's one on Let's Encrypt, how to secure Nginx with Let's Encrypt. Here's one that's just what's new with Ubuntu 16.04. One of the things that's really nice about DigitalOcean, if you're an expert or a beginner, you're going to love their interface. Oh, it's good. It's really, really well done. Very powerful, yet it's very straightforward. And you heard me talk about their API just a few minutes ago in the show. They have a great straightforward API that they iterate and they make as a full feature set. Just like their interface is a full-featured interface, their API is a full-featured interface. And in fact, it's not just the stuff we're writing. There's tons of good open source code, including their command line, docctl, I think, or doctl, a command line interface for your DigitalOcean droplets. So you can go all the way from one of the best UIs or the best UI in the business to the command line. That's so cool. You can spin up machines with Nginx and Ubuntu and Docker ready to go, entire application stacks, or just the bare system. They even have free BSD, and they have data centers in New York, San Francisco, Singapore, Amsterdam, London, Toronto, Germany. I love that interface, though. You can check it out by going to DigitalOcean.com and use the promo code CODERDIGITAL in less than 55 seconds with pricing starting at $5 a month. Man, that's nuts. For $5 a month, 512 megabytes of RAM, a 20 gigabyte SSD, because they're all SSDs, all up the lineup. The pricing is super straightforward. Comes with a blazing fast CPU and a terabyte. A freaking terabyte to transfer. DigitalOcean.com for your next project, for your next experimentation, for your next production server. You can spin up a few, spin up a bunch. Check out that private networking to have back-end servers, a great way to save on bandwidth and have secure back-end servers with maybe a front proxy or a front web server with a back private database. Nice, secure, private networking available. Backup snapshots. It's fantastic. Over at DigitalOcean, DigitalOcean.com. Just use that promo code CODERDIGITAL so you get a $10 credit and we get credit for your visit. DigitalOcean.com, and thanks to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the Coder Radio program. So, Mr. Dominic, you've had some time with Go, and you didn't go.
Yes,
that's awful. I'm sorry.
Indeed. So, you may remember about 4 or 5 months back, whatever it was, I was fooling around with a BeagleBone Black, which, for those who don't know, is kind of a Raspberry Pi Arduino alternative.
Yeah, a beloved one in our community, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, big fan. A little expensive, though. I decided to give something called a Gobot a go. Haha, see what I did there? Which is a framework for developing, let's call them maker projects. But very confusing actual robots, right? Because we talked about software bots. Now we're talking about, quote unquote, gadget bots. The reason for that was pretty simple. They actually have drivers and support for the BeagleBone Black, which is the piece of hardware I have sitting on my desk. And I found it to be really interesting. I've had this kind of maker project that I've been wanting to do for a while. I tried to do it with the JVM, which, not the way to go, right? Not terrible, but it didn't take well. It felt very foreign. Just not the right tool for the job, I think. And before we jump too far into the Go stuff, of course, Python is, an option. Mm-hmm. That's very popular. I specifically wanted to try something more new because I am a curmudgeon. And I'm trying to be less of a curmudgeon.
You're just curmudgeon. You're just trying to get me to play this.
Yeah, it's exactly.
Curmudgeon.
So the Gobot framework is interesting in a couple ways. One, it is compatible with not just the BeagleBone, but it's actually compatible with Arduino, Raspberry Pi, and a whole bunch of other standards. It is, I believe, open source. I could get you the license, but just look it up.
Is that at gobot.io? Is that
Gobot.io?
Yes.
That's exactly
right. Gobot is a framework for robotics, physical computing, and the Internet of Things written in the Go programming language. Yes, you guessed it. You guessed it.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's up on the GitHubs, and I can look into the licensing if you want while you talk about it.
Yeah, go ahead and look at the
Wow,
licensing.
look at that. Look at that. They're also targeting, well, of course, Internet of Things. That makes sense, but they're targeting drones. Not too surprisingly. They have an Atari joystick on here, the Leap Motion, the Pebble Watch, the Raspberry Pi.
That's one of the main things that was attractive to me for it. It's kind of a multi-purpose framework for these type of IoT projects.
And it's got 17 GPIO drivers ready to go.
Yep. And we should also note for people who aren't interested in the Go language that the same vendor also has, again, for free, Project Cylon, which is a JavaScript sister project to this.
Yeah.
And Project R2, which is spelled ARTOO, which is a Ruby alternative to this. There are some differences in what they do and don't support and what devices they do and don't have drivers for. But all in all, they look pretty high quality. I've only played with the Go one myself.
Looks like it's Apache licensed. At least some of the modules and stuff that I'm looking at are Apache licensed. So
yeah. that makes sense.
Yeah.
What I find interesting about this, Chris, is we were just talking about software bots, and a usage I have in mind for that type of project would really go well together with an actual quote unquote IoT device or a real bot, right? Why couldn't the software bot be like a manager or a supervisor to a bunch of little IoT devices?
Explain to me, son. Explain to me.
Let me explain. So these software bots, like the Microsoft Bot Framework, it's a bot, all live in the cloud, right? So theoretically, to communicate with them and for them to communicate with any other devices, all they need is an open connection.
Right.
Obviously, I hope you encrypt it. But there's no reason that you couldn't have a bunch of little, and it could be silly things, right? A coffee timing bot that communicates with your bot in the cloud, your personal assistant, and tells it, okay, time to brew coffee.
Yeah, I could see this. And in this is sort of like, is it one master bot that controls all the devices? Is it?
That's what I would be thinking, almost like a, let's go super sci-fi here, like a Jarvis type thing, right? Where, there's one, I hate to use the buzzword, but like, AI assistant that is controlling all of these small, low cost, which is the key, little gadgets in your house.
So, are you familiar with the Mycroft device? Mycroft.
What is the
Mycroft.ai. Mycroft is it's a Kickstarter. I think I backed it. We've talked a lot about it on Linux Unplugged, but it is an open source Amazon Echo, Siri, Cortana, Google Now type competitor. But what's cool about it is because it's open source. Now, the Mycroft hardware bot itself, like the little device, is Raspberry Pi based. But all of the bot intelligence, all of the intent parsing, all of the language processing is all open source code that runs on Linux. And so they have versions where you have it on Ubuntu desktop and you can pull up Mycroft like you do Cortana. They have a version that runs on a VPS. They have a version that runs on the Raspberry Pi. And it's actually a pretty slick little project. I won't say too much about it because I've talked about it a lot in other shows. But here's a little bit about it.
Sarah, it's time to wake up. The weather in Lawrence is 73 and sunny. It will be warm today with a 10% chance of rain.
Mycroft, start some coffee, will you? Mycroft, connect to Alice's room. Alice, sweetie, it's time to wake up.
So they have.
I love the Linux Penguin.
Yeah, so they have here, an example of it working in a piece of hardware. But really, to do this, you have to have it run as software on Linux, and they already have it. They already have it working with things that have like obvious APIs, like Hugh Phillips and the Wii Motion stuff, and smart things. And they already have it connecting to things like Chromecast and Dropbox and Spotify and Plex and all of that stuff and Roku, and so they already have like a lot of this working. But I'm not actually. It's funny. I'm not super excited about the little hardware device. I could use the hardware device as a front end client to something like you're talking about. I have a server up in the cloud that is running the central Mycroft engine that is aware of all of my devices across my studio, my home, maybe even my vehicle and my mobile devices, right? And it can manage all of these things.
Well, and you're already carrying a hardware device that has the microphone and the processing power to do this and the constant connection. It's called your damn cell phone. Right.
Yeah.
So you don't need, and in fact, if you have an Android wearable, we don't even need it. So there's no, well, this Mycroft thing is very similar to what I'm thinking of. I think it's a huge difference to actually require you to put all these little, that's more like the Amazon Echo, right? You have to put all these little terminal devices in every room of your house.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking is everybody's got their phone strapped to their face anyway all day. That should be the default management console.
So they are also experimenting with Mycroft integration on Ubuntu Touch. So Mycroft is the built-in guide there too. Here's just one more thing, really cool. They have an adapt intent parser, which is open source code. They have the Mycroft core, which is the technology core and the APIs and all of that. They have the text-to-speech mimic, so you can have it do text-to-speech, obviously, and open speech to text. And here's something that's really cool is they're working on making it sound like anybody you really want, which is also kind of a neat trick. Like here, this was sent to me. I was going to save this for Linux Unplugged, but because it fits in so perfectly, this was sent to me by Ryan, the CTO of Mycroft. This is a voice simulation of Popey, who you can hear on Linux Unplugged or the Ubuntu podcast, saying that he secretly runs Arch Linux. This is generated by Mycroft.
I secretly use Arch Linux.
And it sounds
That's
like
not that bad.
Yeah, it sounds like a robot too, but at the same time, it also sounds a lot like Popey.
I secretly use Arch Linux.
Yeah, it sounds like he called in on a really crappy connection.
Yeah, and I just find that to be this for people that maybe want to build their own solution.
I secretly use Arch Linux.
You could build something around this as a product, I think.
Yeah, I think and I think it's not 5 years away. I think it's more than that. We're about to see, and as a developer focused, big change in the default interface for a lot of things we're going to be working on, right? I think a lot of it's going to be speech, computer, what happened, right? Really, I think it's about time we went Captain Picard.
You're just trolling me now at this point, that?
No, I'm not. I mean, this is the first technology in a while, and I don't. And to be clear, I don't think this Arduino, Raspberry, I don't know which standard is going to be the right one. But these kind of, quote, maker technologies and these bots, I don't think they're separate. I think they're actually the way to get there is a marriage between them, right? You need to have both.
Computer, this isn't what I wanted at all.
You're probably right. I think what you're going to have is the closed systems that are very tightly integrated and have a lot of advanced features for this small range of things they do support. And then you're going to have like the open systems where you can connect a lot of different systems together via APIs or bots talking to bots or whatever. Just one last thing before we go. Noah had just tickled me to no end when he was out here. We went out to dinner and he got a telemarketing call from one of those telemarketing bots that is, hello, you have won a prize.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And he transferred that call to another bot that he has that is a time waster that pretends to be listening and answering questions based on what the telemarketer says and then intentionally delays them by claiming to have like a bee on him. And like all this, like it just drags the conversation out. So it wastes the telemarketer's time. And Mike, he put it on speakerphone. We're sitting at dinner and these two bots were talking back and forth, wasting each other's time. It was bot talking to bot, and they had no idea that it was two bots talking to each other because they're so dumb. And it went on for 5 minutes, and it was one of the most hilarious conversations I've ever heard.
And I do want to move on to the next topic quickly, but there is a common, I think, in every business line of talk where if something bad happens, a customer wants to know what happened, and you're not really sure, so you don't want to tell them yet. Because you don't, especially for publicly traded companies, right? You never want to, how do we say, fan the flames of discontent, right?
True.
Could that not whole PR lady shtick be a bot? That's like, thank you for your call. We're aware of, hell, the power company, right? When a line goes down, we are aware that some customers are experiencing an outage, and have a nonsense conversation with the person on the phone that all they're doing is just I don't want to say it, but pacifying them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because really, the power company is never going to give you money off your bill.
Right. Yeah, there are some definitely
They're not
some.
going to do anything.
Yeah.
Comcast isn't going to do anything.
Yeah. Speaking of pacifying, how did your, assuming you want to move on, how did your antigross shot go that was apparently very heavily recommended to you last week?
Yes. So Integros did solve the problem.
Really? And which desktop did you decide? Oh, okay. All right. Wait, before you go there, which desktop did you go with?
No.
Okay.
Actually.
Okay. And
during my wife's hospital stay, her laptop was destroyed. So it made a lot more sense just to get rid of the XPS than to replace it.
Oh.
So all of those hours spent fiddling with drivers, installing, uninstalling, it is now, as we speak, being reformatted for Windows 10.
So for a brief moment, you were seeing the other side of the Linux. What's it called when the pasture is green on the side? You went to the greener grass. You saw Antigross. I'll also tell you something about that GNOME desktop. Each distro configures it a little differently, but I've managed to whittle it down to a few essential extensions and a configuration that actually works quite well. But it does take a little bit of getting used to. Well, you gave it a shot, Mr. Dominic. You gave it a shot. Maybe there'll be a future, few months down the road, maybe this time next year, where life will arrange itself once again. A hardware disaster will strike.
I will say, I still have a Dell desktop here that runs Linux, but
right, yeah, and that one's still Ubuntu, right? And you didn't have the Skylake, you didn't, because
I didn't have any problems. It's an old machine.
Yeah, sure. There you go.
I don't know. How can I say this? I don't know if the time I put in was worth it.
Yeah, it's too much, right? It's too much research at this point. It's funny because I've been watching Leo Laporte do it too, and he really has been enjoying the process this time around of trying out different distributions. Like he said at some point he's got like a dozen different thumb drives with different distros on them that he's been trying out. And you really, if you go all in and you really spend some time geeking, then you can really get to a place where you're happy with it and you really feel like you got a solution that fits. But it is way too much when you're coming into it. It's just way too much to just straight up move over and have your workflow continue without much interruption.
It wasn't even the workflow stuff. A lot of it was like the drivers, right? Like that's the stuff that that really didn't seem worth it. But having said that,
the thing
Windows
too,
10 didn't do much better.
The thing too, what's really super unfortunate about the Skylake thing is, in honest to God, hand to heart, Intel has been really super good about drivers for years now, to the point of which they will literally often have the driver in the Linux kernel before they've even shipped the Intel CPU that the driver's for, or the graphics. Like, they have been so good for so many years. They just really screwed it up with Skylake. And I don't even know the core issue, but for years now, it has been, if you have it in all Intel system, you are going to have a trouble-free Linux experience. And that has really been the only requirements. If you walked into any Best Buy or computer store that just sold some piece of crap computer on the shelf, as long as it had mostly Intel parts in it and maybe NVIDIA graphics, you were 100% good to go. And so this Skylake thing has been a total curveball, and it really sucks that it hits you because this driver's issue is an old Linux problem. And it's compounded right now by the state that Ubuntu is in, where they're not necessarily as aggressive as they used to be in keeping up with the latest kernel and the latest GTKs, and so you're really kind of hitting a conflux of issues. Welcome to Linux.
Yeah, at some point I was spending more time fiddling with display drivers than I was, actually doing work. So
yeah, and that's just with Intel. That's almost unheard of. Really, it's really unfortunate. But the Skylake issue will probably be fixed in a few months. So if you do down the road, try it again. In fact, it might even.
I'm sure it'll work fine when I order an iMac.
That kind of makes me sad that but if that's how it went, I suppose. Well, I'll just wait till they combine iOS and Mac OS and they move it all over to an ARM processor. And then,
you know what, Chris, I will embrace change with Zen and Calm.
And all desktop apps are written in Swift. All iOS UI toolkits for everything.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Mr. Dominic, congratulations to you and yours. I hope everyone stays safe and happy. Where should people follow you on the Twitters throughout the week?
Go to @Dumanuco.
There you go. Get rest, Mr. Dominic. Take lots of pictures. And whenever you can, get a nap in. Even if you don't feel like it, just take it. Take it.
I know.
And there's a lot of sleeping things they sometimes do at the beginning. Don't let them fool you. Hey, join us live over on Mondays. Go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar, codoradio.reddit.com for content and topics, and jupiterbroadcasting.com/contact for feedback. See you back here next week.